first speaker this morning is Mark Pruitt. Mark Pruitt is a principal of Power Bureau, a consulting practice focused on reducing energy costs and price risks for small and mid-sized consumers through optimized wholesale and retail energy markets and transactions. Additionally, Mark teaches courses on energy policy, market, and regulation at Northwestern University, and supports the Department of Energy Net Zero World program at Argonne National Lab. Mark served as first director of the Illinois Power Agency, the state agency responsible for stabilizing consumer energy and costs and managing the state's renewable portfolio standard. Mark received his undergraduate degree from Bradley University and his MBA from the University of Illinois. Fun fact, Mark grew up in Schaumburg and believed for some time that the name was a German translation for near the mall. Let's please welcome Mark to the stage.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Energy matches energy. Good morning, everyone. I appreciate the invitation. When Brad contacted me and said, we'd like you to come and speak about kind of the broad context of the solar industry, I said, well, that's a lot of ground to cover. He said, we can handle it. I said, okay. I tend to be a little bit of a contrarian, so I might say some things that upset people. He said, we can handle it. I said, okay. I said, I usually get paid. And he said, we'd love for you to be there to eat. So I'm very pleased to be here. I'm going to run through a series of slides. These are available to you. I try to footnote everything, so I tend to be a pictures person, so you see a lot of graphs. At the bottom of each slide is a hot link to those graphs in case you want to educate yourself a little bit more on specific topics. Real quick, consumers. Please raise your hand if you're a consumer. Okay. If you're in the solar industry itself, okay. If you're in the energy policy world, if you just realized you're in the wrong conference, happens. Okay, so you heard my background, so we're not going to dwell on this too much, but just so you understand, I look at the world from a consultant's point of view, which is there a problem? Can we solve the problem? What is the cost, the context, the constraints, right? So a lot of what I do is really analysis, right? So I'm not going to throw a bunch of numbers at you today outside of trend analysis. But as was mentioned, I do a number of different things, and you can read that if you're ever interested. So, big picture. This is a long-term view of energy consumption in the U.S., going all the way back to colonial times, coming all the way up to today. You'll notice a few things. One is we use a lot more energy now than even 10 years ago, 20 years ago. You'll also see that the mix changes over time, right? And when we're in our courses at Northwestern, we talk a lot about energy transitions from wood to coal, from coal to petroleum, from petroleum to natural gas to nuclear, right? We're not going to talk about that today. What I do want you to take a look at is, despite the level of excitement and good press about renewables, take a clear look at how much renewables actually contribute to the overall energy picture in the United States, right? This is your hot cup of coffee moment. That no matter how much you like the technology, no matter how much you believe in it, it's still a very small player in the grand scheme of things, right? Policy is seeking to change that, you're seeking to change that, and that's all great. But as I warn my clients almost on a daily basis, hope is not a business plan. You have to be very cogent and objective in meeting your goals. So, How do we go about doing that? Well, we take a look at the current status that even though solar is a pretty small player in the grand scheme of things, it's on an upswing, right? This graph shows you that the amount of capacity, that's the ability to generate electricity, has been and will continue to grow for solar. In fact, the potential for solar growth is higher than any other resource. That's good. When we take a look at, and that's on a national basis, however, here in Illinois, this is the most recent report from Commonwealth Edison. It's a standard report issued quarterly by every energy producer in the state, and it shows the breakdown of electricity delivered in that prior 3-month period. Where is solar? Someone shout it out. 2%. Right? How long, we started in Illinois with solar, like everybody else, in a meaningful way, probably in the early 2000s, and we've gotten to 2%. Right? If you're realistic, you've got a lot of headroom, right? That's what the optimist says. Look how much we have to grow, right? And I think that you can take that tack, but if you're going to see the growth, you're going to have to do a few things. One of those things you need to do is not only take in the information you're going to get from all the other presenters today in terms of good ideas for policy and market and economics and technology, but you also have to understand how these pieces come together and what are some of those challenges going to be. And I've grouped them into 3 buckets, right? There's challenges that we see on the physical side. There are supply chain challenges. Getting the panels and getting the inverters and getting the racking systems over the past few years have been very challenging. Right? Starting to ease up, but that has been a major constraint. Onshoring solar technology fabrication is a trend, and hopefully that will start to ease and allow for some scaling within the sector. Secondly, there are interconnection projects or problems. Commonwealth Edison is within a larger wholesale market called PJM. And to connect a large power plant, solar, coal, nuclear, otherwise, you need to have the permission for PJM to be able to do that. So how many power projects do you think actually get connected to PJM? Do you think 50% of all projects that are proposed get accepted by PJM? Anyone say 50% or more? Okay. I got a 5%. Anyone above or below? Latest report I saw was 15%. So if only 15% of all projects are actually approved for connection to PJM, what does that mean? That means that the project that you're developing, the project you have in mind, it might not work, right? So what do? Do you give up? No. You have more projects. It's a probability equation, right? You need to find more projects. Let's go on to financial. The costs have gone up dramatically over the past few years. For the early years of my career, solar prices were continually dropping, and it was viewed as that's just the trend, and if I sign a contract today, the price will actually be lower in about a year. That's great. But we have increases in capital, labor, and equipment costs now that have really pushed a lot of projects off to the side. That project that you want to develop is more difficult to put together financially today than it was 4 years ago. That's a reality. How do you deal with it? Well, you get more efficient with your capital, you right-size your project, and you get more aggressive with your bidding. That's what I do, mostly on a day-to-day basis. And then curtailments, another big issue. We'll have a chart up here show you what happens in California where the state realizes the dream of massive deployments of solar, only to find out that there are increasing number of hours each year when those solar generator units are disconnected from the grid. They are curtailed, meaning that they're not allowed to put electricity back onto the grid because the grid can't accept the surge in power. So, if your electricity can't hit the grid, you can't sell it. You can't generate a REC. It has all kinds of implications. So, success has its own challenges. And then lastly, we have some policy challenges. We have reliability concerns that are now coming to the fore with the retirement of a lot of baseload and an uneven retirement and replacement schedule. That's not the fault of anyone here in the room. This is the fault of regional transmission operation organizations. And then, we have challenges with imports and exports. Sorry, I should be looking down here. Imports and exports, tariffs are going to be a real issue over the next 20 years. So let's just not drill into all of these. Let's just take a look at the financial challenges. So here are the costs of solar PV, residential, commercial, industrial. And you see and those are in the lines, and then you look into the columns and you see the opposing trend. What you're looking at here from our folks at SEIA, so these are not my numbers, but SEIA is identifying that in recent years, the costs have stopped that downward trajectory, right? 4 or 5 years ago, you actually had a lower cost to deploy solar PV in certain markets than you do today. That's an interesting aspect, and it's something that is happening despite having more installations over time. Although in recent years through 2023, we're seeing fewer installations, and a lot of that is due to higher costs. The projects don't pencil, right? It's just a hard reality. When you have higher costs for components, for the panels, for the racking, for the inverters, you have higher power purchase agreement costs. This is a slide from our friends at Level 10 who track this information. And you can see quarter by quarter by quarter on a nationwide basis, solar, wind in the yellow and blue, and then blended contracts are all increasing. If you have higher costs of something, it tends to deploy a little less quickly, right? This is a challenge. You also have a challenge on the financial side where incentives have limits. This is from the Illinois Power Agency's most recent long-term renewable resources plan, and it indicates the balance of accounts for the renewable portfolio standard funds in the state. And you see the program years running along the left side, the base case of the balance at the end of the year of those funds, and then a high price curve scenario and a low price curve scenario. And as you see, even though all consumers in Illinois served by Ameren, ComEd, and Mid-American pay in the aggregate around $595 million a year that is then used as incentives to purchase renewable energy credits from solar and wind resources, it's not enough. I don't know that it would ever be enough, right? But this is a reality, and it's not just in Illinois. We see this in all states, that the incentives are here, they're good, they're useful, they're beneficial, but they're not forever. We also have changes in state policy. You'll notice that on 4/14/2023, new policy came into being in California where the net energy metering credit dropped by, I think, depending on the user, between 80 and 85%, right? Has a direct impact on the number of projects, right? Policy matters. So when you're hearing from the policy folks here today, I'm certain that they're fully aware of this, and they are very sensitive to the fact that money is necessary to make these projects work, and that incentives and valuation of net energy metering is all necessary part of the puzzle to put a project together. And lastly, curtailments. As I indicated earlier, when there is too much electricity on the grid, energy generators are curtailed. This yellow line shows the curtailment of solar, and the green line is the curtailment of wind in the California markets over time. You can see that as more solar has come online, more curtailments happen. When you have curtailments, you're earning nothing. You're generating electricity that no one uses. It's like the tree falling in the forest when no one's around. Did it make a sound? No, it did not. That's a problem. Maybe battery storage can address that. Maybe thermal storage can address it. That's great. But this is an important lesson, is that solar has constraints. And one of those constraints is the time of generation. If you really want to see scaling of solar, you're going to have to address that. Otherwise, you have to turn it off because you can't risk overloading the grid. So what do? So focus on what you can control, right? Right-size your systems. I know it was very fashionable a few years ago to oversize my system. If I had a need in my home for a 3 kW system, well, 5 kW is better, I'm gonna go do that. Don't do that. You're gonna spend a lot more, and your economics might erode to a point where that asset switches into a liability. I'd suggest you work with your providers to come up with a rational size project. I think that you need to consider combining different solar solutions. I work with about 24 municipalities now on offering community solar to their residents. They love it. We fashion a program so that a resident can subscribe to community solar as well as have solar on their roof. Terrific. They can purchase renewable energy credits with their energy supply. Terrific. All of that is additive. So there's no one technology application that makes sense for everybody. In some cases, you want 2 or 3 options, right? So broadening your mind and being a bit more creative about how you bundle and stack your options is definitely going to be something necessary moving into the future. And then reduce your costs, right? Reducing soft costs is a huge issue. Hardware, panels, all that stuff is going to work itself out in the supply chain. But if you want to see more solar in the Rockford region, start finding more educated buyers. People who understand what this means, that have a good site, that have the financial wherewithal to make the commitment. Those are soft costs, right? What does everything cost? Time or money, right? If there's a lot of time that has to be spent in educating consumers, securing financing, evaluating sites, that all has to be paid for. If you can improve the quality of the projects that are identified, you can reduce the overall soft costs, and you will have more efficient use of time and money to deploy those solar resources. And, lastly, don't rely too much on incentives. Incentives are great, don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-incentive. I'm just saying that they only last so long, right? When they're gone, they're gone. And you need to be able to have your project survive in the absence of those lost incentives. So just a word to the wise, right? You're all grown up, you all have mortgages, you pay for cars, all that stuff, pay your taxes. This is no different than that, right? It's not free. So if it's not free, you have to have a plan. And again, hope is not a plan. Hope is helpful, but a plan is something that requires rigor and data. So I appreciate your time today. I wish you all well. And thank you again for inviting me. It's been a real pleasure. Take care.